Salam, peace be upon you. You and I are standing in a room where two long cords lie on the floor. Not the kind of cords you neatly coil and forget. These are the stubborn kind. Headphones, chargers, extension cords, things that somehow find each other in a drawer and come out as a single living creature. You pick up one cord and shake it. I pick up the other and shake it. They wiggle, they slide, they change their shape. But there is a special moment, an unmistakable moment, when you realize something deeper than messy is happening. You realize the chords are not just near each other, they are linked. Not in the sense of being glued, not in the sense of touching all the time, but in the sense that even if we pull them apart, even if we stretch them, even if we twist them in 100 ways, there is no continuous way, no smooth way to separate them without doing one of two forbidden moves, either cutting one cord or passing one cord through the other. That's the feeling we need for part 25. Because in the pure phi language, our strict PS0 grammar, this is exactly what linking is. It is not a story about forces, not a story about fields pushing, not a story about little objects sending invisible messages. It is a story about what can and cannot be undone while we obey the rules of the domain. It is about which deformations are legal and which deformations are not. Now let me anchor us in where we are. In part 22, we faced defects, places where the smooth story tears, places where we cannot lift phi, our circle-valued phase, into a smooth, real-valued lift, phi tilde, in a neighborhood. Or places where jets, finite stacks of derivatives, cannot be extended through without breaking the declared regularity type. Defects are not added objects. They are typed obstructions. In part 23, we learned to measure charges, integers that come from winding around defects. We do not touch the defect. We enclose it with a loop that stays inside the clean domain D, meaning the domain where lifting and derivatives are legal. And the integer we get is the defect's charge. The key point was, the charge is invariant under admissible deformations. Wiggle the loop, stretch it, reshape it. So long as we don't cross defects and we stay within D, the integer does not change. In part 24, we learned the arithmetic of those integers. Charges add and conserve, not as a law of motion, but as a syntax law, because loops compose like language. If you combine loops the right way, the integers add. If nothing crosses your boundary, the integer cannot change. Now part 25 begins where reality always begins, not with one defect, but with many. Because the moment you have more than one obstruction, something new becomes possible. A loop can be about one defect, or about another defect, or about both, or about both in a way that cannot be separated into first one, then the other without cheating. And that last possibility is linking. So let's say the core idea in one clean sentence before we build it into a story. When multiple defects exist, loops can link them in different topological ways, and the combined phase memory depends on the linking class, not on how you draw it, not on which angle you view it from, not on any diagram. That's the listener picture. Now we need to make it audible and simple without losing rigor. So let's go slowly and define the words we're allowed to use. Phi, pronounced phi, is our only primitive, a map from the event support X into the circle S1. Think, each event gets a position on a ring, not a number line, not a time coordinate, not a spatial coordinate, just a cyclic order token. A local lift, phi tilde, is what we use when we want calculus. It is a real valid function that unwraps the circle locally on a patch where that unwrapping is allowed. The crucial rule is different lifts can differ by adding whole terms, 2 pi times an integer, and the derivative word must not depend on that choice. The first derivative word is a, defined as d phi tilde. Spoken, a equals d phi tilde, meaning a is the differential of the lift. This a is our first public object of change. It is invariant under allowed lift shifts. A jet, pronounced like the airplane, is a finite bundle of derivatives up to some order n. The n-jet is the list of derivatives of phi tilde up to order n on a patch with a declared regularity type. In audio, jet means finite local Taylor vocabulary. A domain is not an afterthought, it is part of meaning. Our clean domain D is the part of the window where lift and jets are legal. D is built by excising neighborhoods around defects and around forbidden boundaries. If you speak derivative language outside D, you are speaking nonsense. A loop is a closed path entirely contained in D. Closed means it starts and ends at the same event location in the domain. Holonomy is the phase memory of a loop. The loop returns, and the accumulated change around it can be recorded as a circle token. Winding is the integer version of that memory when the loop integral lands on whole turns. Now, in earlier parts, we treated loops mostly one at a time. But now, with multiple defects, we will treat loops as a system. This is the real shift. In ordinary life, one cord can be coiled. Two cords can be tangled. But there is a difference between tangled and linked. Tangled can be undone by patient rearrangement. Linked cannot be undone without cheating. In holophase language, linked means the loop system has a topological class that cannot be changed by admissible deformation within D. What is an admissible deformation? It is a continuous change of the loop, like moving a rubber band on a table, where at every moment the loop stays inside D and never crosses an excised defect neighborhood. You can stretch it, shrink it, slide it, but you cannot pass it through a defect and you cannot break it. You cannot cut, you cannot tear. Now, the deepest reason we need part 25 is this. With one defect, charges are enough. With many defects, charges are not always enough. Because two different multi-defect configurations can have the same set of individual charges and still be globally different due to linking. That is exactly why linking bookkeeping exists, to prevent us from pretending sum of charges is the whole story, when the global topology has extra structure. Let me make that intuitive with a human scale analogy. Imagine two sensitive topics in a family. Topic A is money. Topic B is respect. Each topic has a charge in the family, meaning if you go around it, conversations pick up a consistent integer-like residue. Maybe money always triggers the same cycle of tension. Maybe respect always triggers the same cycle of defensiveness. You might say, fine, there are two charges, add them, end of story. But anyone who has lived in a family knows that's not enough. Because sometimes the topics are independent. You can discuss money without touching respect. And sometimes they are linked. Anytime you discuss money, respect is pulled in automatically. The loop cannot go around one without wrapping around the other. That is linking. And notice, linking is not a new force. It is a constraint on permissible conversational paths. It's a grammar property of what can be separated. In the same way, in the pure phi language, linking is not an added interaction primitive. It is a global constraint on which loops can be decomposed into simpler loops without crossing defects or leaving D. Now let's return to the chords on the floor and translate that picture into PS0 grammar. Suppose you have two defects. Call them sigma 1 and sigma 2. Those are the excised sets around them, the forbidden neighborhoods. Now take a loop gamma. Gamma must lie entirely in D. meaning outside those excised sets. In the simplest case, gamma encloses sigma 1 and not sigma 2. Then its integer charge measures sigma 1. In another case, gamma encloses both. If the defects are separable, then the charge of gamma is the sum of the charges of two smaller loops, one around sigma 1, one around sigma 2. This was part 24, additivity. But here is the key. In multi-defect situations, you can have loop systems where the decomposition is not that simple, because the loops themselves are linked with each other or linked with defect tubes in a way that does not factor cleanly. So part 25 installs the grammar for this. We do not need to introduce spatial vectors or distances or anything metric. That would violate PS0. Instead, we say, a multi-defect configuration is described by 1. A set of defect neighborhoods, excised sets, typed and declared. 2. A set of loops in the clean domain D. 3. The equivalence class of that loop system under admissible deformations that preserve containment in D. That equivalence class is what we mean by linking class. Now I want to make the diagram trap very explicit, because it is one of the most common ways people lie to themselves in topology. If you draw two loops on paper, you will see crossings. But a crossing on paper is not a crossing in reality. It is a projection artifact. The same pair of loops can look crossed from one viewpoint and uncrossed from another. So if you define linking as count the crossings in a picture, you have already violated the invariance gate. In pure phi language, linking must be defined as a property that survives all admissible deformations and all admissible redescriptions. Meaning, if you rotate your description or change charts or move a branch cut, the linking class does not change. That is why we will speak of linking classes, not crossing counts. Now let's bring triunity into this, because it's essential. Triunity is the rule that what later looks like time, space, and motion, omega, kappa, nu, are inseparable readouts of the same A equals d phi tilde. They are not independent primitives. When multiple defects are present, any global integration of A around loops is constrained not only by each defect's charge, but by how loops can weave between the defects without leaving D. That weaving is linking. So linking is not a spatial knot story. It is a constraint on the global coherence of A. And since omega kappa nu are readouts of A, linking constraints necessarily shape the tri-echo globally. Even if later physics gives you pictures like vortices, braids, flux tubes, none of that is allowed here. Here we only say the allowed integrals of A around loop systems depend on linking class. Now, to make this stick, let me give you analogies across scales, but always bring them back to the grammar pattern. Cannot separate without cheating. Everyday human reality. Think of two commitments in your life. Commitment 1. Caring for a child. Commitment 2. Caring for an elderly parent. You might think you can schedule them separately, but sometimes they become linked. You cannot satisfy one without immediately affecting the other. A phone call about your parent happens during your child's school run. A medical appointment overlaps with a parent-teacher meeting. The obligations are not just two numbers. They are linked constraints. You can rearrange your day, a deformation. You can swap times, change routes, reorganize tasks. But unless something crosses a boundary, unless you change the structure of the commitments, the link persists. That's a social linking class, not a feeling, a constraint class. And it is invariant under many reshufflings. History and behavior. Think of two institutions in a society, the economy and the media. In some eras, they are loosely coupled. A bank crisis is a bank crisis. News covers it, but the two can be treated as separate in policy. In other eras, they become linked. Economic signals drive media narratives drive economic behavior, and you cannot change one without immediately twisting the other. You can change laws here, regulations there, small deformations, but the coupling persists unless you change the underlying topology of incentives and channels. That is linking. Non-separability under admissible transformations. Biology. Think of two genes that regulate each other in a feedback loop. You might think gene A affects gene B, and gene B affects gene A, and that's just two influences. But the deeper structure is that the system has loops in its regulatory grammar. The behaviors become linked. You cannot adjust expression of one without altering the other, because the permissible trajectories of the system wrap around both. Again, we must be careful. PS0 does not allow us to turn biology into literal phi claims. We are using it as an analogy. The shared pattern is a loop system whose class cannot be simplified without breaking the rules. Now, in actual physical examples, people love to talk about magnetic field line linking, DNA supercoiling, braids of world lines. Those are powerful images, but they tend to import metric structure and dynamics. So we keep the images only as intuition, invisible knots that persist under stretching. We do not import the extra machinery. We stay with linking class in the clean domain. Now let's install the 4 gates inside the story as discipline. First gate, well-formedness, the WF gate. A linking sentence is only a sentence if it declares its objects. That means you must name the loop system, not just a loop, but which loops, how many, and what their declared orientation conventions are. You must name the defect partition, which excised sets exist, and how they are typed. No, they are linked claims are valid unless the loops and the defect sets are explicitly declared. In everyday terms, you cannot say these two chords are linked without pointing to which segments you mean and what counts as separation. If one end is free and can pass through, then you were never talking about linking, you were talking about tangling. So in PS0, a well-formed linking claim looks like, in domain D, there is a loop system gamma equals gamma 1, gamma 2, and the defect partition sigma equals sigma 1, sigma 2. Under admissible deformations in D, the system has a non-trivial linking class L. You do not have to speak it that formally to the listener, but that structure must be present in your meaning. Second gate, invariance, the INV gate. Linking depends on linking class, not on diagram. That means, if I redraw the system, choose a different chart, move a branch cut as bookkeeping, or deform the loops without crossing defects or leaving D, the linking class must not change. If a supposed linking effect changes because you drew it differently, it is not a linking effect. It is a representation artifact. This is one of the most important firewalls in the entire topological layer. Because human beings are visual animals, we confuse pictures for structure. Holophase refuses that confusion. Third gate, domain, the DOM gate. Every linking claim must specify that the loops and all deformations remain in D, the clean domain. If during your deformation you cross a defect neighborhood, your claim changes its meaning because you changed which obstructions are being respected. If during your deformation you cross a boundary you did not type, your claim collapses because the sentence is no longer about the same domain. So domain is not optional. It is part of the grammar. And this is exactly why, in the real world, you can have people arguing endlessly about whether two things are linked, when the true answer is you are not working in the same domain. You have not declared the same exclusions. One person is allowing a move, the other person forbids. That is not disagreement about reality. That is disagreement about grammar. Fourth gate, non-encodability, the NEC challenge. This is the sharp one. If someone says, when there are multiple defects, there must be a new interaction primitive, we say, stop. First, check if the effect is reducible to linking classes plus local jet constraints. Meaning, before you invent new primitives, ask whether the new behavior is simply the global topology of the loop system expressing itself. Historically, many mysterious interactions are exactly that: topological entanglements mistaken for forces. In PS0, we do not claim that this explains all of physics. We simply enforce the discipline. Do not multiply primitives before you test whether topology plus jets already encode it. Now, we must also include the prediction and falsification in episode 13b's grammatical sense. Prediction. Diagram-dependent linking effects vanish under isotopy-clean bookkeeping. Spoken plainly, if your claimed effect depends on how you drew the picture, then when you clean your bookkeeping and use only linking class invariants, that effect disappears. In other words, false linking is fragile. True linking is robust. Falsifier. Show a linking effect that changes under isotopy while all domains and classes are held fixed. Meaning, you keep D fixed, you keep the defect partition fixed, you keep the loop system in the same admissible class, and yet the supposed linking invariant changes. If that happens, then either your invariant was not actually invariant, or your definition was ill-formed, or you have discovered a deeper failure in your grammar. Now I want to connect this back to phase memory and holonomy, because that is the point of this part. In part 20, we learned loops compose, holonomies multiply, windings add. In part 23 and 24, we used that to handle charges. But now, with linked loop systems, holonomy can fail to factor in the naive way. Let me explain that carefully without importing forbidden structures. Suppose you have two loops, gamma 1 and gamma 2, each enclosing different defects. In a simple separable case, the holonomy of a loop that goes around both is equivalent to the product of the holonomies of the separate loops, because you can deform the big loop into a composition of the small loops in D without crossing anything. But in some multi-defect linking classes, the deformation that would split the loop system is not admissible. It would require passing one loop through another, or passing through a defect neighborhood, or leaving D. In those cases, the loop system has global constraints that are not captured by single loop charges alone. This is why we say, linking bookkeeping tells you when composite holonomy factors and when it does not. And that is the entire purpose of part 25. Now let me give you a vivid example with ropes, because it stays faithful to topology. Take three rings, three closed loops of rope. Arrange them as Borromean rings, the famous configuration where no two rings are directly linked, but all three together are inseparable. Remove any one ring, and the other two fall apart. But keep all three, and you cannot separate them without cutting. That is a higher order linking class, and it shows something profound. Linking is not only pairwise. A system can have no pairwise links and still be globally linked. That is exactly the kind of global meaning not reducible to local pairwise data that holophase cares about. In the same way, in multi-defect phi domains, you can have configurations where individual charges look ordinary, pairwise relations look ordinary, and yet the global loop system carries extra structure. Linking bookkeeping exists to keep us honest about that. Now let's sprinkle one more cross-scale analogy that helps the listener feel this. In everyday social life, you can have three people, where any two seem fine, but all three together create a stable pattern that cannot be reduced to pairwise relations. Two of them talk well. The other two talk well. The remaining pair talks well. Yet when all three are together, a loop forms. A predictable cycle of misunderstanding, alliance shifts, tension, and resolution. Remove any one person, the cycle breaks. Keep all three, the cycle is topologically stable. That is Borromean structure in human behavior. Again, we are not equating it to phi defects. We are showing a shared pattern, global linking beyond pairwise measures. Now, let me bring triunity back one more time as we approach the close, because the listener might still secretly picture linking as a spatial knot. But we must keep reminding, triunity is not optional. Every global constraint on A is simultaneously a constraint on the three readouts: cadence, texture, transport, omega, kappa, nu. So when linking classes change, they do not only change where things are, they change the global coherence conditions for the entire tri-echo structure. We will not name physics, but later, when you see particle-like behavior, force-like coupling, entanglement-like correlations, you will remember. Many of those behaviors are shadows of linking classes and their invariants. But that is later. For now, we are freezing grammar. Now we close with a single carry sentence, the one tool the listener should hold. Here it is. When multiple defects exist, it is not enough to count charges. You must also track linking classes, because the global phase memory depends on how loops weave around multiple obstructions, and that dependence is invariant under admissible deformation, but never guaranteed to factor into single defect pieces. And now, as promised, a concise summary of Part 25, spoken cleanly. Summary of Part 25. In the pure phi language, when more than one defect is present, loops can relate to defects in more than one topological way. Linking is the name for this global relationship, a property of a loop system in the clean domain D that cannot be changed by admissible deformation, meaning continuous reshaping that stays in D and does not cross excised defect neighborhoods. Linking is not defined by diagrams or projections. It is defined by linking class, so invariance under redescription is mandatory. This part installs the grammar for multi-defect configurations. You must declare the loop system and the defect partition for well-formedness. You must enforce isotope invariance, so linking does not depend on how you draw it. You must keep all loops and deformations inside the declared domain D, and before proposing new interaction primitives, you must test whether the effect is reducible to linking classes plus local jet constraints. The formal prediction is that diagram-dependent effects vanish under isotopy clean bookkeeping. The falsifier is any claimed linking effect that changes under isotopy while domain and class are held fixed. Next, we move to Part 26, where we type degeneracy and critical regimes, places where operators themselves require guards, so the language remains cheat-proof as we approach more delicate structures. Always, peace be upon you.